In honor of Labor Day, I'd like to tell a story about labor. I worked at a lumberyard in the 1980s, and we had this mill where they used to do all kinds of specialty work on big timbers. You know, some of the really big homes in LA, they have these beautiful high ceilings, and they would show off these big, beautiful 30, 40-foot beams with carved ends. And carving those ends was really hard to do because the beams were huge and heavy as rail cars, and they could really only be cut by a giant bandsaw with a razor-sharp blade. And the guy in charge of our mill, Alberto, we used to call him Big Al, he was one of the very few people in LA who could pull it off, because the bandsaw itself is bolted in place, which means if you're going to if you're going to do scroll work on a timber, you have to move the timber. So it took 5 or 6 of us to move it around an inch at a time, while Big Al is using hand signals to, twitch us this way and that, because we couldn't hear him over the noise of the saw. It was really delicate work, but at the same time, it takes a ton of muscle and teamwork, and most of all, it takes time. So you can't just waltz into the yard and order it up and get it in an hour, okay? The mill's busy. But contractors and developers, well, they're busy too. And generally speaking, they're hard chargers, right? They're always in a hurry. So one day, Big Al has these 3 beams to cut, all from different contractors. And this guy who's second in line doesn't want to be second in line, so he pulls Big Al aside, pulls out a $100 bill, he says, well, how about you move me to the front? And wow, Big Al hands him his money back, no smile. And you could just see how Al found that really profoundly insulting. So, you get your beam when you get it, was the message. But, a couple hours later, another one of the contractors, the guy who's third in line, he comes back to the mill, and he goes over to the table where they're filing the blades, and he drops off a case of beer and just starts to walk away. And Al says, what's that for? And the guy says, well, it's Friday afternoon. I thought you guys might find a use for it. So Big Al looks at his watch. It's pretty close to closing time. So he says, well, why don't you come back in an hour and help us drink it? The guy says, okay. So you can probably guess what happened, right? Quitting time, we close the yard fence, and we all go back to the mill and help carve this guy's beam after hours. And he comes rolling up just in time to see the finishing touches, see how the bandsaw ballet gets done. And we were all sitting around having a beer. And, oh, by the way, nobody opened a can of beer before that work was done, because there's a lot of pride in that mill. But anyway, I said to Big Al, we could have bought 7 times as much beer with that $100. Why didn't you take the money? And he says, because that money was a bribe. But this beer is friendship. So happy Labor Day.